Good morning, everyone. I'm Ankit. You're watching StudyIQ IAS YouTube channel where we take up daily the newspaper analysis from the Hindu and the Indian Express. And today is 7th of January, and today we'll be discussing many important articles. But before that, let me tell you my source of inspiration. That was Dr. Manmohan Singh. Now, if you remember Dr. Manmohan Singh's public career, you'll also remember his most important achievement when he was the Prime Minister of India. That was Manmohan Singh enabled the Indian government to sign the Indo-US nuclear deal. And because of that, India had immense benefits. First of all, it got the waiver of nuclear supplier group, which enabled India to participate in global trade for nuclear fuels such as uranium, plutonium. It enabled India to get involved in trade with Japan, Australia, which are major suppliers in the nuclear power sector. It also enabled India to separate its civil and military nuclear assets. So this was an important achievement of Dr. Manmohan Singh. And why am I taking his name? Because he was a very calm demeanor person. That is, he used to talk less and he used to do more. And this is also a source of inspiration for many UPSC aspirants across the country. Because in this exam, you are required to put in a lot of efforts, but there is a chance that people will not see your efforts. However, please make sure to do your work daily, complete your class lectures daily, complete the revision of your notes on a daily basis, and let me tell you, even if you are able to do it for 5 months, you will easily clear this year's prelims. And this is a fixed and a set type of instructions which is applicable for everyone. Now, good morning for those who you are watching. Good morning, Shranu. Good morning, Kalpana. Good to see you here in the morning. Now, without taking too much of your time, these will be the articles that I will be covering in today's newspapers that have been picked up from the Hindu as well as the Indian Express. And these articles are in addition to the articles which I am not covering today, because if you look in the Hindu newspaper, especially in the op-ed section, you'll see an article on the collegium system of the Supreme Court and High Courts. Now, what is collegium system? It is a system in which or through which the judges to the High Court and Supreme Court of India are appointed. And this is a very different system as against appointment of ministers, selection and election of political leaders, and hence these kind of news articles appear daily and quite frequently in the newspaper. So please do not worry. If such articles appear in the upcoming future, I will make sure to cover that particular article. Now we'll start with our today's discussion. And the notes for the session will be available on the Telegram channel ATS Live, and I will make sure to make these notes available immediately after the class ends. Understood? Now, good morning, Narsima. Now, before moving with today's articles, let us try to first of all solve the question that I had given you yesterday. With reference to H5N1 influenza, consider the following statements. The first statement, H5N1 is a zoonotic virus that primarily affects birds but has potential to infect humans. Now, I told you bird flu, especially the H5N1 variant of bird flu, it is primarily affecting the birds and animals. However, I told you yesterday that because of the factor called mutation of virus, there is a possibility that such viruses can even trickle down to human beings. Although this is a rare incident, however, the possibility of it exists, and hence the first statement here was a correct statement. Moving to second statement, human to human transmission of H5N1 has been frequently observed, leading to widespread outbreaks. Now, I told you human to human transmission is possible if the person suffering from this disease infects a particular surface. However, this is not as frequent as the transmission between animals to animals. Understood? So, it is not frequently observed, hence the possibility of outbreak among humans relating to avian influenza or H5N1 is not possible. Therefore, second statement here is incorrect. So from our discussion, we can safely say that only one is correct. Therefore, option A here was the right answer to our discussion. Now, this will be the mains question that I will be taking before this session concludes, that despite its strategic and symbolic significance, the Indo-US Civil Nuclear Agreement has faced challenges in full operationalization. Discuss the reasons behind the limited materialization of the deal and suggest measures to address these obstacles. Now, you are to attempt this answer in 250 words, and there are many parts of this answer writing which we'll discuss before the session ends. Understood? Now, without taking much of your time, let us begin with our first article that appeared in today's newspaper. It appeared on page 10 of the Hindu newspaper. Now, this article highlights that the Supreme Court panel, which has been formed to discuss and negotiate with the farmers who are protesting on the Punjab-Haryana border, they have urged Mr. Dhalewal, who is the main protester and the leader of the protesters, to accept medical help. Now, why is Supreme Court urging the Mr. Dhalewal to accept medical help? Because he is currently undergoing a hunger to death fast. That is, he has said that I will not eat anything unless you accept my demands. So these kind of demands made by any section of Indian society has been recognized by the Indian Constitution under Article 19. But you understanding, fasting until death can eventually lead to death because you are not eating anything. And because of this factor, the Supreme Court has urged that Mr. Dhalewal, please continue protest, but make sure to seek medical help so that your health does not deteriorate. Understood? So this was the context of today's article. Now, a similar article appeared yesterday in the newspaper, which I left out intentionally because this matter is ongoing, and today's discussion gives us an ample opportunity to even discuss yesterday's article. Now, such article which highlights an important part of Indian Constitution, that is balancing the right of expression which is provided under Article 19 and balancing it with right to life which is a part of Article 21, they are important from polity perspective of our exams, and hence they are also important from GS paper 2 because polity syllabus is given here. Now, if you look at the prelims previous year questions, you will find that the questions relating to fundamental rights, its applications and relevant provisions in the Constitution have been asked quite frequently, and a question almost appears every year. That is why this article is very important from your prelims perspective, and pay close attention to the things that I am about to tell you in the scope of our today's discussion relating to this article. Understood? Now, yes, Shri Kalpana, answer was A. No, Shanu, answer wasn't C for the first question. It was option A. Please reread the question again. Now, the Supreme Court has formed a committee which will discuss and negotiate with the farmers who are protesting in the Punjab-Haryana region. These farmers are demanding the government so that the government gives legal sanctity to MSP. Now, MSP is an indicative pricing where the government announces pricing for 22 crops, and the prices MSPs are paid by the government to farmers who are selling them the produce manufactured or cultivated in their farmlands. Suppose if the MSP of wheat is 35 rupees per kg, and if I am a farmer and I am selling the government 10 kgs of wheat which I have cultivated on my own farmland. So the government is liable to pay 35 into 10, that is 350 rupees, because government has declared MSP for wheat. Now currently this is just an indicative pricing, which means although government can pay MSP prices, but it is not legally obligated on the government to pay MSP prices. Also, even if I take my crops to the government reserves the right to reject buying those crops. So there is no legal obligation on the government, despite the fact it announces MSP every year, to purchase the food grains on MSP prices. And the farmers, they are demanding that the government should provide them with the MSP, and it should be legally mandated not just on government but also on private companies to buy the food crops on MSP. Understood? Now, this is the demand of farmers, and the leader of these protesters is Mr. Dhalewal, who is the convener of the pressure group of farmers called Samyukt Kisan Morcha, which is a non-political organization, and he has been on an indefinite hunger strike, which means he has said that he will not eat anything until and unless government meets his demand. Now, what is actually what does actually our constitution says about such moves by persons? And if you look at the screenshot that I've provided here it says freedom of speech and expression, which is a part of Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. That is a fundamental right. Now, this article states that it grants the citizens the right to freely express their thoughts, opinions and ideas. Now, this thought, opinion and idea, it also includes if you have anything bad to say about a person. For example, if government brings a policy and if I criticize that policy, the government will not punish me. Why? Because criticizing any policy for that matter is my fundamental right to speech and expression, and hence it is provided in the constitution. Therefore, even the government cannot take that right away from me. And using this very right, Mr. Dhalewal is criticizing the government and has conducted an indefinite hunger strike to meet or to force government to meet his own demands. Understood? So, this was Article 19. Now, if you read this article again, the state has the ability to impose reasonable restrictions on the exercise of freedom of speech and expression. Now, my ability to say anything or to criticize anything is not an absolute right. That means it is a qualified right, that there are some restrictions which can be imposed on me to stop me from using or exercising my right to free speech and expression. Understood? Now, what are these reasonable restrictions? First of all, if there is an interest in the sovereignty and integrity of India, for example, if I am asking people to commit violence, you understand that creates a lot of problem for the government, and it is also an unjust demand. So, that can be restricted by the government, and I can be punished on the fact that I am demanding people to commit violence in India. Also, whenever it threatens our India's relationship with foreign nations or public order, decency or morality, even then the government can impose restrictions on my use of freedom of speech and expression. So, this freedom of speech and expression, you understand, is not an absolute right. Rather, it is a qualified right, that in most cases I can use my freedom of speech and expression right. But in some cases, suppose if I demand people to commit violence, or if I threaten India's relationship with any other country, on that grounds government can stop me from exercising my right to free speech and expression. Now, there is another article called Article 21, which provides right to life and liberty to individuals, which means there is my life and I have the liberty to live my life as possible as I can be. Understood? Now, this right to life has been interpreted by Supreme Court in many reasons, and the state does not have the ability to restrict my right to life except for the fact when it can, through a procedure established by law, take my life away. For example, if I commit a heinous crime called murder or anything, and the provisions under that law is that if an individual like me commits murder, then the state can punish that individual through a death penalty. So, that logic can be applied, that it is a procedure established by the law of the government, and hence using that law, a government can deny any person the ability to exercise right to life. Now, this right to life also means that I have the ability to live a healthy life, to live a good life, and not just live or exist merely. Understood? So, this right to life is enjoyed in a wider connotation and not in a limited connotation. Now, good morning, Sauji. Now, let us see what was the observations of Supreme Court in the protest that they are holding in the Haryana-Punjab border, and what the Supreme Court has said whether these protests are constitutional or not. Now, the Supreme Court said that fasting unto death that fasting unto death, it jeopardizes the right to life, because Mr. Dhaliwal is currently undergoing fasting unto death, which can lead to health complications because he's not eating proper diet and having or taking proper food. And he's also a senior citizen. That is why it jeopardizes the right to life, which is provided in the Article 21 of the Constitution. And accordingly, the Supreme Court has given directions to the Punjab government to hospitalize Mr. Dhaliwal. But the Supreme Court also said that while hospitalization, the government should ensure that his right to freedom of speech and expression under Article 19 is not taken away. That he can continue his protest, but while remaining hospitalized, because by hospitalization, it will enable the government and the doctors to take care of the health of Mr. Dhaliwal. Now moving to another incident where the Supreme Court committed or commented upon whether the right to life is or right to freedom of speech and expression covers the right to protest or not. Now in 2013, back when Mr. Swami Ramdev was protesting against the then UPA government in 2013. Now what the UPA government did, that it sent the police in the deep night, and it also tried to jeopardize or disturb the protests that were being held by Swami Ramdev. Now this matter was heard in the Supreme Court under Lam Leela Maidan incident case, where the government dispersed of the protest in late night. Now the Supreme Court in this judgment, it said that hunger strike is a form of protest which has been widely accepted in Indian society, both by the virtue of that it is historically recognized and legally provided in the Constitution of India. Why did the Supreme Court said that it was a historical example? Because if you remember, the father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi, he participated in many fast until death protests, especially in Ahmedabad Textile Worker Union's favor. Also, he protested against the Britishers' move to create a communal identity for or separate electorates for people belonging to scheduled caste. And because of his fast unto death, it forced the government and the people belonging to scheduled caste to accept and sign Pune Pact in 1934. So, the right to protest is applicable to Indian citizens, and it also includes right to commit or decisions to have hunger strike to meet their own demands. Now, this is a historical example where Mahatma Gandhi participated in many such fast until deaths. Also, this Constitution of India, Article 19, it provides freedom of speech and expression to individual, and the interpretation of freedom of speech and expression is that people can also undertake hunger strike in order to force others to meet their own demands, and it is being recognized both historically, that is by Mahatma Gandhi, and legally by our Constitution of India. Now, Supreme Court in other judgments also, particularly in a judgment passed in 2013, recognized that hunger strike is a form of expressing dissent. That suppose if an individual like Mr. Dhaliwal does not agree with any government's policy, so he has the right under Article 19 that provides for right to freedom of speech and expression to express dissent against that very policy, and this expressing dissent must be made sure that it cannot be perceived as a threat to public order, because there is no violence currently happening in that region. Rather, it is a peaceful protest where Mr. Dhaliwal is demanding something from the government. Now, in this regard, if such protests are happening and they are peaceful protests, in that regard, the police's power is just so that they can impose reasonable restrictions in order to ensure safety and convenience of the people who are protesting there. However, without confronting a peaceful protest, that is, the government cannot arrest the peaceful protesters. The government cannot stop that protest from happening because it is provided in the Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. Also, there should be preventive steps that should be founded by the government, but those preventive steps such as stopping those protests can only happen when there is an actual and prominent threat endangering the public order and tranquility. And today's protests that are happening in Punjab and Haryana border, they are peaceful protests, and it does not pose any prominent or real threat which will endanger sovereignty of India, and hence such protests cannot be stopped by the Punjab government or central government. Now, the Madras High Court also gave certain directions in such cases. For example, there was this case P. Thangam and Superintendent of Police, where a person threatened to go on a hunger strike in Marina Beach because the government of Tamil Nadu was not accepting his demands. Now, in the judgment passed by Madras High Court, it stated that protesting democratically by the way of hunger strike, which does not cause any inconvenience to anybody, is a right guaranteed by the Constitution of India. And the police in this regard, at max, they can only obtain an undertaking from the protesters that such protesters will try to maintain peace and orderliness, and also police will not interfere or impose themselves on the basic rights which are guaranteed by the Constitution, and hence it imposes limitations on the administration and police so that they can facilitate the people who are protesting and they are not disrupting those very protests. Understood? So this was all the observations of the Supreme Court of India and the High Court of Madras on why protests are a part of Article 19 of the Constitution. And when such protest threatens your right to life, that is by hunger strike, if a person is endangering their life, it is an obligation on the government to provide hospitalization and health care to the ones who are protesting. Now, based on this information, let us try to solve the first practice question of the day. Right to dissent is protected under which article of the Constitution of India? Now, everyone, please answer me this in your comment section and let us see who can first answer me correctly. I am waiting for your answer. Now, until you answer, I will move to the second article of the day, and this article you can see appeared on the very first page of the Indian Express newspaper. Now, this article highlights that the National Security Advisor of US, Mr. Jack Sullivan, is in India, and Jack Sullivan has agreed to ease out the curbs which the US has imposed on India earlier, back when India tested its nuclear weapons in 1974 and 1998. Now, there were restrictions imposed by US so as to prevent India from becoming a nuclear powered nation. However, because India signed a nuclear deal with US back when Manmohan Singh was in power, and because of these many nuclear deals, the US government, it is trying to reduce those sanctions and take those sanctions away from India. Now, Shri Kalpana says answer was C. Another one, anyone else who can give me the correct answer? No, Shri Kalpana, your answer is not right. Now, as I was saying, this article says that US has begun the process to ease out the curbs on nuclear deal because US wants to implement the nuclear deal at the earliest possible time. Now, this article particularly is important from GS paper 2 syllabus because GS paper 2 syllabus highlights India's relations with global powers. And who is the largest global power in the world? It is the United States of America. Now, earlier, back when the world was divided into two blocks, that was Soviet bloc and US-led bloc, India was more inclined towards Soviet bloc. But after economic reforms and 1990s onwards, we have seen that India has increased its alignment with US in general. And signing of a nuclear deal was a transformative step in this regard. Because signing of nuclear deal enabled India to separate its civil and military assets and also enabled India to participate in global trade of nuclear fuels. Now, the context of today's discussion, it included that the incremental step, that is slowly by slowly, US is trying to operationalize the Indo-US nuclear deal. But you will understand the Indo-nuclear deal was signed in the year 2007. So, why has it taken so long for US to actually implement and operationalize the Indo-US nuclear deal? And the answer is that back in 1974 and 1998, where US had imposed sanctions on India because India tested its nuclear weapon and US was not comfortable with the idea. And hence, US tried to prevent India from becoming a nuclear weapon state. And it imposed several sanctions on India. Now, these sanctions even continued even after the Indo-US nuclear deal was signed. And accordingly, the NSA Jack Sullivan, he has announced in his visit that Washington is finalizing the steps to remove the non or long-standing regulations on the US India relationship. And these regulations are intended to promote the operationalization of Indo-US nuclear deal. Now, what was Indo-US nuclear deal? Now, this was an agreement signed by India and US after 3 years long of negotiations, and it enabled India, first of all, to participate in the global trade of nuclear fuels such as plutonium and uranium. Also, India had nuclear assets, that it had the nuclear enrichment plant, which was used by India to enrich fuels for nuclear power generation, but it was also used for enrichment of fuel which are used in India's nuclear bombs. So these were integrated plants. However, after this nuclear deal was signed by India and US, India decided to separate its civil nuclear plants from that of military based nuclear plants. And these civil nuclear plants were available for audit, which was conducted by the UN-led body called IAEA. So, this civil nuclear plant were under the nuclear deal which was signed by India and US. However, military plants which were used to enrich uranium, which are used in nuclear bombs, they are not a part of Indo-US nuclear deal. Also, by virtue of this nuclear deal, US agreed that India will be provided a waiver from nuclear suppliers group, because this supplier group's acceptance is key for any country to participate in global trade of nuclear fuels. And hence, US agreed to provide the NSG waiver to India, which enabled India to become a party in the global trade of nuclear fuels. So this was the Indo-US nuclear deal. However, this was signed back in 2007, and today in 2025, it has still not even operationalized fully. So what are the reasons actually that has prevented the operationalizations of Indo-US nuclear deal? And the first reason is that many Indian government entities such as Bhabha Atomic Research Center, Indira Gandhi Atomic Research Center, all of these are key important institutes and organizations which play a key role in India's nuclear power program. However, after India tested its nuclear weapons and these institutes played a key role in development of nuclear weapons, the US government, it imposed or banned these organizations from participating in global trade of nuclear fuels. And this was done through a list called US Entity List. And if you realize, US government, especially the Department of Commerce, the Bureau of Industrial Security of Department of Commerce of US, it brings a list which imposes restrictions on certain organizations and companies who are participating in activities which are detrimental to interest of which country? Of United States. And these includes foreign individuals, businesses and organizations, and these are subject to export restrictions and licensing requirements for certain goods and technologies. For example, which kind of goods? Those goods which can be used to develop weapons of mass destruction such as nuclear bombs, or goods which are used in terrorism. And if a company, individual or organization participates in such activities, those companies are restricted from accessing exports from US. And this was the very factor which was preventing Indian organizations such as Bhabha Atomic Research Center from participating in Indo-US nuclear deal. And according to today's visit, the US government, especially the NSA, has highlighted that such Indian government entities which are currently present in US entity list, they will be deleted from that list, and hence even BARC, IGRC, they can now participate in the nuclear related trade. Now, the another factor which was preventing the full operationalization of Indo-US nuclear deal is the 10 CFR 810 authorization, which is actually an abbreviation for Part 810 of Title 10 Code of Federal Regulations. Now, this is a US Atomic Energy Act, and this act provides that certain US vendors, they can export technologies to other countries. However, despite doing so, they cannot manufacture that item in another country. And this, you can understand, promotes exports from US, but India does not want that to happen. Why? Because India itself wants to manufacture and construct many materials which are used in nuclear power program, and this kind of a legislation goes against the interest of India. And hence, India has demanded from US that it should amend this act and allow the companies who are based in US to manufacture nuclear related products even in other countries such as India. Now, there was this another factor called as Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act of the year 2010. Now, what this act does is that it provides a mechanism for compensation of victims who suffer from any nuclear related incidents, and this compensation is provided in a specific procedure. Also, the liability under which bodies or organization is responsible for providing compensation is also fixed according to this act, and this act has a very transformative step. First of all, it made the liability of providing compensation not just the operators of nuclear power plants, but also on the suppliers of the equipments which are used in nuclear power plant. And when not just the operators but also equipment suppliers are being held liable, it naturally acted as a source of hurdle for equipment manufacturers to install those equipments in Indian nuclear power plant, because these equipment suppliers, they were of the opinion that our equipment is already of high quality, and if by the mistake of operator of a nuclear power plant, God forbid, a nuclear incident happens, then the liability should solely be on the operator and not on the equipment supplier. Now, the equipment suppliers, they wanted the government to ease out on such liability provisions and fix the liability only for the operators. And hence, this kind of an act, it prevented many companies from investing and setting up of their equipments in India. So, these three factors put together were acting as a source of impediment for full operationalization of the Indo-US Nuclear Act. Understood? Now, the suggestions in this regard to address the obstacles which are currently faced by India is, first of all, the need to amend and interpret the liability laws, because as I told you, India imposes a liability both on supplier of the nuclear equipments as well as the operator of nuclear plants, whereas there is a need to balance and make it the liability more on the operator, because it is primarily the operator with whose mistake the nuclear incident may happen, and the supplier only have a very less liability of providing compensation to the victims. Also, there is a need to encourage collaborations in research and development for cost efficient and safer nuclear technologies. Now, across the world, there has been a demand for small modular reactors, which are reactors made until a capacity of 300 megawatt. Now, these small modular reactors, it is envisaged that such reactors will be used by private companies to meet their energy requirements, and it will also be easier to install and operate. Now, such technologies are being developed worldwide, and if India were to have a good command over developing and operationalizing such technologies, it will obviously need help from other countries, and in that regard, collaboration between India and US will play a key role in improving the relations between these two countries. Now, also, there is a need to strengthen the innovation alliance under the Indo-US initiative on critical and emerging technology, because under this technology, the technology levels can be provided by the US government and US based companies to India, and will enable Indian companies to manufacture good quality items inside India itself. And this is what India ultimately wants, that it wants to be a nuclear power, it wants to install many nuclear power plants in India to meet the emerging needs of India's growing economy. However, it wants to do so just by the use of Indian equipment. Also, there is a need to streamline regulatory processes because currently, because of many factors, the approval process for new nuclear power plants are quite lengthy and time-taking in nature. And because of these time-taking approvals, we have seen the installation of nuclear power plants have taken a long time. And this discourages many investors. So, first of all, we need to provide fast land acquisition. We need to provide fast environmental approval to such projects, and for that we need to provide a single window opportunity for the investors. Also, there is a need to explore innovative financing models because uh, investing and setting up of a nuclear power plant is a huge expenditure which is borne mainly by the operators of nuclear power plant, and because of this factor we have seen that many companies, particularly those belonging to US, they have gone bankrupt because their investment was too long and did not enable them to recover their investments. And hence we need innovative financing models such as government can pitch in with their investments and so can the private players, and that will enable these private players and the government to set up more nuclear power plants in India. Understood? So this was all related to our second article which dealt with India's relations with US and how Indo-US nuclear deal even decades after passing has not become fully operational. And the three primary reason was that US has imposed sanctions on many Indian companies which prevented these companies from import of goods and services from US. US has brought in legislation which prohibits its companies to manufacture the nuclear related technology in other countries, and India's civil nuclear liability law which imposes liability of providing compensation on both operators of the nuclear power plant and the equipment suppliers. Understood? So these are three components, and to address these obstacles, these are the suggestions. Understood? Now we will try to write the answer before this class ends, so please stay tuned to the video. Now, as I highlight you daily, you can use this link to access this very video on our website as well. As accessing these videos on our website has immense benefits, you can get access to PPT notes and lectures right there itself. You will be provided the option to download the videos which you can even watch without an internet connection, and you can practice your questions using the interactive MCQs that we are providing there. So this course is available just for a sum total of 1 rupee, which is a very small amount for such huge beneficial features. Understood? Now let us try to take a look into another article of the day. This one appeared on page 5 of the Indian Express and it deals with a statutory body called Lokpal. Now such statutory bodies such as Lokpal, National Human Rights Commission, National Green Tribunal, CBI, Enforcement Directorate, Central Vigilance Commission, etc. These are important from prelims perspective because their powers, their composition, who appoints the members, etc. are important from prelims perspective. So you will see quite frequently there have been questions on what kind of bodies are statutory bodies, what kind of bodies have constitutional recognition, etc. And hence such topics are very important from our exams perspective. And also regulatory bodies and judicial statutory bodies, they are mentioned in GS paper 2 syllabus, hence it is also important from mains perspective. Now this article highlights that the Lokpal, it saw a petition filed to it which alleged corruption made by the former Chief Justice of India, Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud. However, the anti-corruption ombudsman, that is Lokpal, it has disposed of this complaint and it said that the Lokpal cannot act on Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud because it is barred by the jurisdiction. That means the jurisdiction of Lokpal is not applicable on serving and former judges of the Indian judiciary. Now, what is actually this body called Lokpal? When was this enacted? What kind of a body is this? Let us try to find out in our discussion. Now, the nature of Lokpal is that it is a statutory body. And why am I saying it is a statutory body? Because it was formed based on a statute passed by Indian Parliament, that is Lokpal and Lokayukta Act of the year 2013. Now, you remember protests of Anna Hazare. That Anna Hazare protest actually demanded the enactment of this very act by the Indian government, and accepting the demands of the protesters back then, the UP government enacted Lokpal and Lokayukta Act, which provided for Lokpal. And the job of Lokpal is to actually inquire and investigate on the allegations of corruption which are done by public functionaries. Understood? Now, what are these public functionaries? We will find out in the next slide. Now, the organization structure of Lokpal, it consists of a chairperson and 8 members at maximum. Now, the chairperson, he or she can be a former Chief Justice of India or even a former judge of Supreme Court. In addition, he or she could also be an eminent person who have an impeccable integrity and outstanding ability and may have served in a similar function for a sum total of 25 years. And the 8 members, it includes maximum of 8 members, out of whom 50% are called as judicial members. Now, these judicial members, they include either a former judge of Supreme Court or a former Chief Justice of any high courts in India. And a minimum of 50% of these 8 members belong or should belong to communities such as scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, other backward classes, minorities, as well as women. So, this representation of members are inclusive in Lokpal, that it has judicial members and it also includes members belonging to the marginalized section of the community. Understood? Now, let us try to see how are actually members appointed into Lokpal. Now, it is the President of India who appoints the chairperson and members of Lokpal, but he or she does not do so on his own discretion. Rather, the President of India acts on the recommendations made by a selection committee, which consists of chairperson, that is Prime Minister of India, and the members of this committee include Speaker of Lok Sabha, Leader of Opposition in the Lok Sabha, Chief Justice, and one eminent jurist who is nominated by the President on the recommendation of rest 4 members. Understood? So, this is what the selection committee of Lokpal looks like, and this committee recommends the name of chairperson and 8 judicial members. Understood? Now, the tenure of people who are serving in Lokpal is that they can have a term of maximum 5 years or until they attain the age of 70 years. And whichever of this is earlier, the tenure of that Lokpal member ends. Understood? Sorry, this has fallen down. Let me correct it. Yeah. Now, what is the jurisdiction of Lokpal? Now, Lokpal inquires into many people, particularly belonging to public functionaries, but who are actually those public functionaries? This includes Prime Minister of India, Minister of the Union Government, or even a Member of Parliament. As well, it also includes people who are serving in the Union Government, such are officials of the Union Government belonging to Group A, that are IAS, IPSs, Group B, C and D. So, all kinds of government officials and including politicians such as Prime Minister, Ministers of the Union Government and Member of Parliament, if they undergo or do any kind of corrupt activities, such activities will be assessed and investigated by Lokpal. Now, this public authorities also has a wider connotation. You have to understand, because it covers chairpersons, members, officers and directors of any board or corporation or society which is established by an act of parliament. All the members, chairpersons, etc. of a body which is established by the act of parliament are liable to be investigated by Lokpal. Also, if their organization is partly or fully even funded by the union government or any state government, even then the members of those organizations, especially there are many NGOs in India who discharge many kind of political and policy related activities, and they are funded by the governments that are union and state governments. So, even the members belonging to those NGOs can be investigated by Lokpal. Also, it covers society, trust or body that receives foreign contribution above 10 lakh rupees. Even those bodies can be investigated by Lokpal authorities. Now, what are actually the powers of Lokpal? The powers of Lokpal include superintendence over and above to give the directions to CBI, based on which the CBI is conducting an investigation. Now, Lokpal has the power to direct CBI to investigate a case, and if the CBI is investigating any particular case, with respect to that case, the power of Lokpal is there on CBI. For example, if an investigating officer of CBI is investigating a case which is recommended by Lokpal, so the transfer of that officer cannot happen without the permission of Lokpal. Now, the inquiry wing of Lokpal has been vested with the powers of a civil court, and this powers of confiscation of assets, it includes proceeds, receipts, benefit, etc., and these powers are provided to Lokpal to make it a body with effect. Also, it has a power to recommend transfer and suspension of public servants also who are engaged in activities relating to corruption, and so does it has a power to give directions to prevent destruction of records, especially when Lokpal is investigating a cases of corruption. So all of these gives Lokpal a wider powers, especially to the investigating agencies such as CBI, that is Lokpal can investigate, and also it has a power to confiscate assets which are procured using the corrupt activities. Understood? I hope Lokpal is quite clear to you. Good morning, Krishna. Good morning, Mangalu. Good morning, Narsimha. Yes, Ranu, you can always pause the video and try to solve the answer, and the video will be available to you. No need to worry about that. Now let us try to see whether we are able to solve this practice question or not. Consider the following statements regarding Lokpal. Lokpal is a statutory body established under Lokpal and Lokayuktas Act of the year 2013. This is a correct statement. The jurisdiction of Lokpal includes the Prime Minister with certain exemptions. Now what are the exemptions that the Lokpal has to make if or when it is investigating the Prime Minister of India? Now Prime Minister of India, like every other public functionary, is applicable to be investigated by Lokpal. However, as the post of Prime Minister is very important politically and economically, the investigation against the Prime Minister cannot be made on whims and fancies. And in that